The rain poured mercilessly as Ada clung to her mother's frail hand. The dim candlelight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the mud walls. Her mother's breath was shallow, her voice barely a whisper. "Never let them break you," she murmured before her last breath left her body. The candle went out, leaving Ada alone in the darkness. In the weeks following her mother's death, Ada's world changed drastically. Her father, consumed by grief and loneliness, remarried quickly, a decision that seemed to bring a fleeting sense of hope back to the house. Madame Eunice entered their lives with promises of a new beginning, her smiles bright, her demeanor warm. Ada's heart, still fragile from the loss of her mother, hoped this woman might somehow bring light to the dark void left behind. But the warmth was short-lived. Once the wedding celebrations ended, the reality of her new life under Madame Eunice's roof began to unfold. Her stepmother's kindness evaporated the moment the guests departed. Ada's days became a blur of endless chores, tasks that seemed to multiply with every passing hour. "Ada, fetch water from the well." "Ada, clean the yard." "Ada, make sure my daughters have their breakfast before you eat." Eunice's sharp voice echoed through the house, biting at Ada's every move. What had once been a home filled with warmth and laughter now felt like a cold, oppressive prison. The air in the house seemed thick with resentment, suffocating any hope Ada had left. Pamela and Titi, her stepsisters, took every opportunity to torment her, sneering as they watched her struggle to meet their demands. "She's nothing more than a servant," Pamela would say, her voice dripping with disdain, while Titi giggled, flicking bits of leftover food at Ada. Ada's father, once the man who had always supported her, had become a mere shadow of himself. His grief was so consuming that he had lost the ability to see what was happening right in front of him. His silence, his inability to stand up to Eunice, felt like a betrayal. Ada's world was collapsing, piece by piece, and she had no one to turn to. One evening, after spending hours cleaning the floors and cooking for the family, Ada found her school books in a pile of ashes. The last remnants of her mother's encouragement, her dream of an education, had been destroyed. Madame Eunice stood over the ruins, her face twisted with malice. "You were born to serve, not to dream," she sneered, her words cutting deep into Ada's heart. The last shred of Ada's hope seemed to vanish in that moment. Her dreams of becoming someone more than a servant, someone who could make a difference, seemed impossible. Tears blurred Ada's vision as she kneeled beside the ashes of her books, her heart breaking. Something caught her eye, a small, tattered diary hidden beneath her mother's old clothes. Trembling, Ada picked it up, its pages yellowed with age. She opened it and found her mother's writing, words that spoke of resilience, hope, and the strength of knowledge. "Knowledge is power. Never stop learning." These words ignited something inside her. Her mother's wisdom, even in death, was a light that guided her through the darkness. The fire that had been smothered in Ada's heart began to burn again. No matter what her stepmother did to her, Ada knew one thing: she would not let them break her. Determined to reclaim her future, Ada found small ways to defy Eunice's oppressive rule. With each passing day, the fire that had been rekindled in her heart burned brighter. The diary her mother had left behind became her sacred guide, a reminder that no matter the circumstances, knowledge and education were her tools for survival. Despite Madame Eunice's relentless demands, Ada sought out moments to learn. She began to secretly gather scraps of paper, pages from old magazines, discarded books, anything she could find, and scribbled notes. With a broken pencil she had salvaged from the trash, she painstakingly copied down math equations, letters of the alphabet, and stories she remembered from her childhood. When Eunice wasn't looking, Ada would sneak away to the corner of the yard, where the shadows of the trees provided some cover, and immerse herself in her makeshift lessons. But as always, Ada's dreams were not allowed to flourish. Madame Eunice, who had never been one to tolerate defiance, soon discovered Ada's secret. One evening, after a long day of chores, Eunice stormed into Ada's room, her face twisted with fury. "Ada," she shouted. "You think you can hide your nonsense from me? You think you'll become something more than what I say? You are nothing. Just a servant." Before Ada could speak, Eunice grabbed the diary from her hands and threw it into the fireplace. The flames hungrily devoured the pages, and Ada's heart shattered as she watched her mother's words burn away. The fire seemed to consume not only the diary but also the last vestiges of her hope. Now, you will learn your place, Eunice sneered, her eyes cold and triumphant. In the coming days, she devised a plan. If she could not study at home, she would find another way. When she was sent to the market for errands, she lingered at the schoolyard, standing in the shadows as the teacher's voice floated through the open windows. She memorized the lessons, repeating them under her breath as she walked home. She listened to children recite their alphabets and whispered them to herself in the dead of night. But secrets, no matter how carefully kept, have a way of unraveling. One fateful afternoon, Eunice followed Ada and found her near the schoolyard, listening with rapt attention. Rage flashed in her eyes. "So, this is what you do," she said. "Sneaking around like a rat, embarrassing me." Ada barely had time to react before Eunice grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her home. That evening, as darkness settled over the village, Eunice locked Ada in the storeroom, this time with no food, no water, and no light. "You will stay here until you forget your foolish dreams," Eunice's voice rang out before the heavy bolt clicked shut. For 2 days, Ada lay in that suffocating darkness, hunger gnawing at her belly, her lips cracked from thirst. Every bone in her body ached, every breath felt like a battle. But Ada had survived too much to give up now. On the 3rd day, when Eunice finally opened the door, expecting to find a broken girl, she found something else, a quiet, burning defiance in Ada's eyes. That evening, while running an errand in the market, Ada slumped onto a wooden bench, exhausted, her body frail from hunger. A wrinkled hand touched her shoulder. She looked up to see an old woman with deep-set eyes and a knowing smile. "You look like someone with a hungry mind," the woman murmured, pressing something into Ada's palm. It was a book. "Knowledge is power, my child," the old woman said before disappearing into the crowd. Ada clutched the book to her chest, hope flickering once more in her heart. But just as her spirit lifted, she overheard a chilling conversation. Eunice was speaking with a stranger, a man with a harsh voice and greedy eyes. "She is strong, obedient," Eunice said. "She will make a fine housemaid. Take her by the end of the week." Ada's blood ran cold. She was to be sold. And this time, she knew, if she didn't act fast, she would lose everything. Ada's heart pounded against her ribs as she backed away from the market store, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had overheard it clearly. Her stepmother had sold her off like cattle. Within days, she would be taken away, far from everything she had ever known. The thought of being ripped away from her mother's memory, her hidden books, her chance to fight, it made her stomach churn with dread. That night, she lay awake, her mind racing with plans of escape. But where would she go? How would she survive? She had no family, no money, no protection. And worst of all, she had no one to turn to. Desperate, she did the only thing she could. She went to her father. She found him sitting alone in the courtyard, staring at the moon as if searching for answers in the sky. His once strong shoulders slumped, his face gaunt with exhaustion. "Papa," Ada whispered, stepping forward, her voice trembling. He flinched at her voice, as if it caused him pain. "Go back inside, Ada." She knelt before him, clutching his hand. "Please, Papa. Madam Eunice is going to send me away. You have to stop her." His hand stiffened in hers, but he did not pull away. For a fleeting moment, something flickered in his eyes, guilt, regret, sorrow. But then, as if a shadow swallowed it whole, he shook his head. "I cannot," he whispered. Ada's heart shattered. "You are my father. You are supposed to protect me." His lips parted, but no words came. He only turned away, retreating into his silence, into his grief, just as he always had. Ada knew, then, that she was truly alone. That night, she tried to run. She slipped out of the house barefoot, her breath tight with fear. She sprinted through the village, her feet pounding against the dirt road. She could make it to the old woman at the market. Maybe she could help. But she never made it. A rough hand grabbed her wrist, jerking her back. Eunice's furious face loomed over her. "You think you can escape me?" she hissed. Before Ada could scream, another hand, a man's, clamped over her mouth. The next thing she knew, she was thrown into the storeroom again. But this time, it was different. This time, Eunice wasn't going to let her out. The darkness swallowed her whole. The storeroom, once just a place of punishment, now felt like a grave. Days passed. She could hear the household moving on without her, the laughter of her stepsisters, the sound of Eunice's voice ringing through the walls. No one came for her. The hunger was unbearable at first, twisting her inside into knots, but after a while, it dulled into a strange emptiness. She no longer had the strength to pound on the door, to call for help. Her lips were cracked, her limbs weak. The hallucinations began soon after. At first, she thought it was just exhaustion, the hunger making her mind play tricks. But then, she saw her mother. She stood at the edge of the room, bathed in soft light, her eyes filled with sorrow and warmth. "Do not give up, my Ada," she whispered. Tears slid down Ada's cheeks. "I can't, Mama," she choked out. "I have nothing left." Her mother knelt before her, cupping her face in her hands. "You have everything you need inside you." The vision flickered, and then, suddenly, Ada wasn't in the storeroom anymore. She was a child again, sitting on her mother's lap, listening to her soft voice reading from an old, leather-bound book. "Tell me, Ada," her mother had asked back then, "what is the most powerful thing in the world?" "Love." Ada had guessed. Her mother had smiled. "That is powerful, yes. But do you know what is even stronger?" She had shaken her head. "Knowledge," her mother had said. "Because even when they take everything from you, your home, your freedom, your dignity, if you have knowledge, you can rebuild it all." The memory snapped Ada back into herself, back into the cold, suffocating storeroom. Knowledge. That was her way out. She forced herself to sit up, her muscles screaming in protest. She felt around in the darkness, her fingers brushing against something cold and sharp. A broken piece of pottery. With the last ounce of strength she had, she began scraping at the wooden door. Scratch. 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 Time lost all meaning. Her fingers bled, her body shook with exhaustion, but she kept going. Just when she thought she couldn't do any more, she heard it, soft footsteps outside. And then, a key turning in the lock. The door creaked open, revealing Pamela standing there, her face pale, her eyes filled with guilt and hesitation. Ada stared at her, too weak to speak. Pamela knelt beside her. "I read your diary," she whispered. "I know the truth now." Tears slipped down Ada's cheeks, though she no longer had the strength to sob. "I'm getting you out of here," Pamela said, gripping her hand. "Tonight." Hope flickered in Ada's heart. For the first time in a long time, she believed that escape was truly possible. Pamela's hands trembled as she helped Ada to her feet. The dim candlelight flickered against the storeroom walls, casting long shadows over her sister's frail frame. Ada could barely stand, her legs weak from starvation and exhaustion. Pamela hesitated, guilt pulling in her chest. "I should have helped sooner," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ada, despite everything, managed a weak smile. "You're helping now." Pamela wiped her eyes and gripped Ada's arm firmly. "Come. We don't have much time." Together, they slipped through the back door, into the quiet of the night. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth, and the sky stretched above them, heavy with stars. Ada inhaled deeply, feeling the crisp air against her skin, a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness of the storeroom. Freedom was so close. But as they reached the village road, a sharp voice shattered the silence. "Where do you think you're going?" "Eunice." Ada's breath caught as her stepmother emerged from the shadows, a lantern casting a cruel glow over her sharp features. Behind her, Titi lingered, eyes wide with uncertainty. Pamela moved in front of Ada protectively. "I won't let you hurt her anymore." Eunice scoffed. "You're just as foolish as she is." Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with fury. After everything I've done for you, Pamela, this is how you repay me. Pamela's fingers curled into fists. You didn't do anything for me. You made me cruel, just like you. But I see the truth now. She turned to Titi, her voice pleading. You see it too, don't you? Titi hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. Ada watched the exchange, her heart pounding. This was her chance. Summoning what little strength she had left, she stepped forward. I am leaving, Madame Eunice. Her voice wavered, but her words held power. And you will not stop me. Eunice's lips curled. You are nothing, Ada. An orphan. A burden. Where will you go? Ada lifted her chin. Anywhere is better than here. Eunice moved toward her, but Pamela stood her ground. If you touch her, I will tell everyone what you've done. Eunice froze. Pamela's voice grew stronger. You locked her away. You tried to sell her. You burned her books. You turned Papa against his own daughter. Do you think the village will stand by when they hear the truth? Eunice's expression faltered for the first time. A flicker of panic passed through her eyes. The moment stretched unbearably. Then, from the darkness, a voice broke the tension. She doesn't need to say anything. We've had enough. Ada turned to see the market woman standing at the edge of the road. And she wasn't alone. Behind her, several villagers had gathered, their expressions a mix of anger and disappointment. Some clutched lanterns, others carried walking sticks. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. Eunice stiffened. This is none of your concern? But the old woman stepped forward. When a child is mistreated, it becomes everyone's concern. Eunice's gaze darted around, searching for an escape. The power she once held was slipping from her grasp. Then, from behind her, another voice spoke. Enough. Ada turned sharply. Her father. He stood just beyond the firelight, his face weary, his posture stiff. For the first time in years, he looked at Ada, really looked at her. Not with avoidance or guilt, but with something else. Something painful. I should have protected you, he said, his voice rough. I failed you, Ada. Tears burned in Ada's eyes, but she didn't move. Her father took a shaky breath before turning to Eunice. You will not harm my daughter again. Eunice let out a hollow laugh. You're too late. You think they'll forgive you? She gestured toward the villagers. You were silent while I did what I pleased. You let me break her. A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Then the market woman spoke. A man is not measured by his past mistakes, but by what he does to fix them. Eunice let out a slow breath, her shoulders slumping. For the first time, she looked tired. Ada, despite everything, felt no triumph in seeing her stepmother defeated. Instead, she felt something unexpected. Pity. She stepped closer, her voice quieter now. Why did you hate me so much? Eunice's gaze met hers, and for the first time, there was something raw in them. Not anger. Not cruelty. But pain. I was just like you once, she murmured. A powerless girl, at the mercy of others. No one saved me. No one cared. Ada's chest tightened. Eunice let out a humorless laugh. I learned that only the strong survive. And I decided I would never be weak again. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, softly, Ada said, you didn't have to become like them. Eunice flinched. Pamela, her voice barely above a whisper, added, you didn't have to make us like you, either. Eunice's hands clenched at her sides. Her breath hitched. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. The tension broke. The villagers murmured, shaking their heads. Some turned to Ada, offering soft words of encouragement. Her father, looking as though the weight of the world had finally settled on his shoulders, faced her again. I will never make this right, Ada. But if you let me, I want to try. Ada studied him, emotions warring within her. She wasn't ready to forgive. But she was ready to move forward. She turned to the market woman. Will you help me? The old woman smiled. I already have, child. Ada let out a shaky breath, nodding. For the first time in years, she was truly free. The sun rose over the village, golden light spilling across the rooftops. For the first time in years, Ada woke up without fear. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth from the night's rain. She sat outside the market woman's home, sipping a cup of warm tea. It still felt unreal, being safe, being heard. Being free. Pamela sat beside her, stirring her own tea absent-mindedly. Are you okay? She asked hesitantly. Ada exhaled, watching the steam curl from her cup. I don't know, she admitted. I think I will be. Pamela nodded, looking down. I meant what I said last night. I should have helped sooner. Ada glanced at her stepsister. In Pamela's eyes, she saw something unfamiliar, genuine remorse. I forgive you, Ada said softly. Pamela's head snapped up, eyes widening. You do? Ada gave a small smile. You made a choice when it mattered. That means something. Pamela swallowed hard, blinking back tears. I want to be better. Ada reached over, squeezing her hand. Then be better. The moment was interrupted by a commotion in the village square. People whispered, heads turning toward the same direction. Ada and Pamela followed their gaze, and there stood Eunice. She looked different. Gone was the arrogance, the sharp cruelty in her gaze. She stood in the center of the square, her shoulders hunched, her hands gripping the ends of her scarf as if steadying herself. She wasn't alone. Beside her was Ada's father. He cleared his throat, his voice rough. Eunice has something to say. A hush fell over the crowd. Eunice lifted her head, and for the first time, she looked directly at Ada. Her lips parted, but for a long moment, no words came. Then, finally, she spoke. I was wrong. A murmur rippled through the villagers. Eunice swallowed. I did terrible things. I hurt Ada. I hurt my own daughters. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to continue. I can't undo it. But I will not pretend anymore. She turned to the village elders, her chin lifting slightly. I accept whatever punishment you see fit. A long silence followed. Then the market woman stepped forward. You have admitted your wrongs, the old woman said. Now, what will you do to make it right? Eunice hesitated. She looked at Pamela and Titi, her daughters. Then at Ada, the girl she had tried to break. Her gaze softened, and something inside her seemed to shift. I want to change, she whispered. If Ada will let me. All eyes turned to Ada. Her heart pounded. Forgiveness was a choice. A difficult one. She thought of her mother's words, written in that old diary. Hatred breeds hatred. You can end this cycle. Ada took a deep breath. Change takes more than words, she said. It takes actions. Eunice nodded, swallowing hard. I know. The village elders exchanged glances, then one of them spoke. Eunice will not be cast out. But she will work to rebuild what she destroyed. A decision had been made. Eunice looked relieved, but also overwhelmed. Ada didn't know what the future would hold for her stepmother, but she knew this: she wouldn't let hatred define her. Years later. The sun filtered through the windows of a small, modest building near the village square. Inside, rows of shelves lined the walls, filled with books. A chalkboard stood at the front, and a group of young girls sat at wooden desks, their eager faces bright with curiosity. Ada stood before them, wearing a crisp white coat, a stethoscope draped around her neck. She was no longer the scared girl locked away in the storeroom. She was Dr. Ada. She had fought for her future, and won. The small library had once been the very storeroom where she had suffered. Now, it was a place of learning, a safe space for young girls seeking knowledge. As Ada glanced at the crowd gathered for the opening ceremony, her eyes landed on a familiar face. The old market woman stood at the back, smiling proudly. It had taken years, but Ada had finally learned the truth. This woman had been Eunice's childhood teacher. The only one who had tried to save her. Ada walked over, her heart full. "Thank you," she whispered. The old woman chuckled. "I only guided you to the path, child. You chose to walk it." Ada turned, scanning the crowd. Her father stood beside Pamela and Titi, pride evident in their faces. And then, standing a little apart, was Eunice. She had aged, her once harsh features softer now. She didn't meet Ada's gaze at first, but when she finally did, she gave a slow, hesitant nod. Ada nodded back. The cycle had been broken. She had won, not through revenge, but through perseverance, knowledge, and forgiveness. And that, she knew, was the greatest victory of all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more exciting tales like this.